So thanks again, everybody who's here today and everyone who's watching this recording. This is our last installment of the Strategies for Success workshops with this year. We've been really fortunate to be able to partner with the Office of Disability Services for a lot of these workshops this year that go over a variety of different skills and things that students have asked us in the past to kind of elaborate on, and different techniques that help them in the classroom. And so this one's always a really fun one, and one that a lot of students say that they benefit from, because if I remember, this was always a very anxiety ridden time in my life. So the space that we're in right now is the student lounge. We're open Monday through Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And it's a space where students can come in, utilize different offices who are doing drop-in hours, meet with clubs. So it's really student-centered space and student-focused. And so if you ever needed more information about the Student Lounge, you can email me at melissa.rogers@bristolcc.edu. Today's presenter is Allison Brewer. She's a learning specialist in the Office of Disability Services, and she has a lot of great tips to give us about test taking and managing test anxiety and stress. So I'll hand it over to Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And thank you again for everyone who's here. I know we have a small group, but I'll do, like I said before, I'll try to do my best to present as if we have a large group, because who knows how many people will view the recording. So since we do have a small group, feel free to interject at any point. You can always post in the chat. And I know Melissa's really good about staying on top of the chat, and she can like alert me to any questions or comments that come up. In the presenter mode, I don't always see the chat. So if you want to talk there, that's fine. You could always raise your hand, or you could just unmute yourself and say, oh, can I say something? And that's completely fine. We don't have to wait till the end. Just keep in mind that this is being recorded. So if there's anything that you didn't necessarily want, on the recording, maybe wait till the end and we can stop the recording and talk off there. So yeah, if we don't, feel free at any point. Like Melissa said, I'm one of the learning specialists in the Office of Disability Services. So I support a caseload of students who have documented disabilities and who are going through the office for disability related accommodations. So you might be wondering, like, why would this person have any authority to be talking about testing? Like, what does she know about that? And prior to COVID, one of the main roles I had in the office was overseeing our specialized testing program. So I would work with the majority of students that came through the office for testing accommodations. And I would oversee roughly 1,000 exams per academic year. So over time, I just got very familiar with, test taking on campus. I saw a lot of faculty exams, got a lot of feedback from students on what kind of things they found stressful about preparing for exams and test anxiety and whatnot. So I learned a lot over my time doing this position. So I feel like I have a good amount to share, and I'll, call on, you guys to always let me know what things have worked for you as far as preparing for testing, or what types of things you're really wanting some guidance on. So like I said, we'll keep this fairly informal. So can everybody see my screen, or can somebody just maybe unmute and say, yes, I see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's move on. And I'm going to try to not be a talking head and leave a lot of room for conversation. So let's move. So the first question is, and why you're all here, I'm sure, is, to talk about how anxiety provoking test taking can be, which I think when you think about it, when you're taking an exam or a test or a quiz or something timed for a class, that's a very different experience than anything else you have in your life. You're usually not set to complete a task in a certain amount of time with all these different constraints like you are when you're taking an exam for class. And it can be really anxiety provoking for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are really obvious, like fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to be on the test, what you should be studying, not feeling prepared, not doing well, negative thoughts or catastrophe thinking, like if I don't pass this test, it's all or nothing, like I have to pass or I'm not going to pass the class. If I don't pass the class, I won't graduate, I won't get a job, and it just spirals out of control, and it contributes to the anxiety. And then there's the fear of forgetting everything you've studied, or what we call blanking out. you can prepare, get the test and your mind kind of freezes and you don't know what to do. And that can be really anxiety provoking. And that's mainly what we're going to talk about, like preventing that blanking out thing that kind of happens to all of us. Test anxiety, is something that can be overcome. And a lot of the time it just has to go with how we prepare for our exams. So that's what we're going to talk about. Did anybody want to say anything before we move on? Okay, let's move on. So what are our objectives? So we're going to talk mainly about studying and test taking strategies, and preparation really is the key. In almost every situation of test anxiety that we experience, the key really is preparing. Like, it's as simple as that. There's really most of the time, there's nothing more than just being prepared and preparing well. But we will talk at the end about some methods to manage test anxiety. That's could be more like counseling related and resources there. So don't worry about that. We'll definitely talk about those things too, but the bulk of it is going to be preparation focused. So let's talk about like the basics of studying. Say you have a test coming up. What are some things that you can do on the front end to kind of start preparing and thinking, getting your mind kind of set to take your exam? The first thing I would recommend is really finding out all the specifics about the exam. Like, how much time is allowed for the exam? What kind of questions are going to be on it? Like, what's the format? You want to find out if it's like multiple choice or short answer or essay based, because that'll kind of frame how you start studying for it. A lot of the time faculty or professors will include that type of information on your course syllabus, but some professors don't. Some of them don't include all that detailed information. So if they're not forthcoming about that information, it's absolutely and recommended. You can definitely ask them. Because like I said, you're going to study for a multiple choice test, probably differently than you're going to study and prepare for an essay. You also want to make and follow a study schedule. And a really key thing I want you to take away from this presentation is you absolutely have to avoid cramming. You really have to review regularly your material, because cramming is just not an effective long-term strategy. You're just going to end up burning yourself out. It'll increase the anxiety, which is not what you want, because you don't want to blank out after you spend all night cramming to then go to the test and then not remember everything you stood up all night and now you're tired for. You just want to prevent that. You want to gather and organize your study materials and study when and where you learn best, because we're all very unique. We're not all robots. You want to think about, I'm best in the morning, so that's when I'm going to focus the majority of my energy on studying. I know I get distracted at home, so I think I'll study at the library, because that's where I can, really give my uninterrupted focus and attention and make the best use of the study time that I have, and obviously limit the distractions. And you also want to take periodic study breaks. That kind of leads into the, cramming thing. Like you don't want to study nonstop for 6 hours without any breaks. It's just not as effective. And there's like this whole science behind taking study breaks called the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but Pomodoro comes from the 1980s, when there was an Italian student who wanted to figure out a more effective way to study for his exams. So what he ended up doing was taking so Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato, if anybody didn't know that. So he took a tomato shaped timer and he broke up his studying into really like specific chunks of time. So he would study for 25 minutes, then his little Pomodoro or his tomato timer would go off and he'd take a 5-minute break. Then he would do another Pomodoro or another 25-minute study session. Then the timer would go off and he'd take another break. So he would do that 4 times, taking 5-minute breaks in between. And then at the end, which would be an hour of studying when you think of 25 times 4, he'd take a longer break. And he found that that was much more effective for him, because he was able to focus all of his attention on, studying during his Pomodoros, and then he got the reward of having the breaks in between. So, sometimes when we're getting ready to study or do something unpleasant, it is easy to just put it off if it seems too hard. But breaking it down into smaller, more manageable chunks can make it less intimidating and easier for us to get started. And then lastly on this slide, I wanted to say you want to prioritize studying the most difficult material for you, which can be challenging because for us as humans, we don't want to do challenging things most of the time. We have a tendency, like we want to do the things that come easier or natural to us. But you don't want to just focus all your energy on studying things you already know. That's not going to be a good use of your time. You really want to think about the things that are the most challenging and spend most of the time studying that stuff, obviously. So yeah, we'll move on, but does anybody want to say anything about any of these basics or anything that they do? No? Okay, can move on. All right, so using study guides or any course material. So when you're getting ready to prepare for your test, it's a good idea if your professor has provided one to use the study guide that they give you, because if they've taken the time to create something like that, it's very likely that the material on the study guide is going to mirror what's on the test. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't put in the effort to prepare you in that way. You can also use previous quizzes and exams to guide your studying, because a lot of the time information gets recycled from, quiz to test or test to final. And like I said before, pay attention to the material that you're less confident with when studying. You might want to go through the study guide and highlight the things in one color that you're pretty confident on. You can just review that stuff. And then the things that you're more concerned about, highlight in a different color and focus more of your energy on that. If you find that your professors don't provide study guides, you can actually make your own. If you know you're going to be tested on, say, multiple chapters or one chapter, you can organize the study guide by topic. Sometimes you can use your syllabus to create the study guide, because you can look through, usually the syllabus will say week to week what chapters or what material you're studying. And that can kind of guide how you create the study guide. That way you have a good sense of what you need to focus your energy on. Look at your past quizzes and exams too, if you get them back from the professors, and know which questions you answered incorrectly. Because if you got them incorrectly one time, you probably would get them incorrectly again, unless you really focus on figuring out why that was. Look up the answers if your professor didn't review the exams. And like I said, focus on that, because you want to not make the same mistake twice, obviously. And then a really key thing would be to take practice exams if they're available. That's a really important point that I also want you to take from this presentation. You want to get your brain in the habit of the test taking mindset. That's pretty much the most effective way of studying, is to test yourself. And we're going to talk about that more in length. Does anybody want to say anything about what they do right now to prepare to study, or anything they found effective or not effective?
So when I went to take the practice tests at the Marines,
Uh-huh.
I found it effective to get all the study guides, answer all the questions, and then score it myself. Go back over the answers I got wrong, re-answer the questions, find out how I got it wrong, and so on and so forth. And eventually I got a 97%.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, and you were doing a very active study method.
Oh yeah.
What I'm going to say, I'll actually move the slide, but just reading things is not studying. And I think a lot of students don't know that. They either don't come out of high school having having study skills, and they think just reading things over and over is a way of studying. Or if you've been out of school for a while and you're coming back to the college setting, you might not know really how to use your time effectively to prepare, but just reading something over and over is really not a good way of studying. But that's kind of what we all naturally assume, I think, because college tends to be really reading and writing intensive. But yeah, you were doing a much more active participant type thing. So yeah, that was good. And it showed at the end. Yeah, very good. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Did you predict potential questions and test yourself on them, or did you mainly use questions that were already prepared?
I used different questions. It was different questions. Each study guide was very different from the other one. It went from easiest to hardest, and I grabbed all the hardest ones, and answered all the questions. It was a lot of questions. It was like probably about 200
I can
questions.
imagine. Yeah. Yeah. For that setting, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to study and prepare? I'm guessing not just one night.
Probably like a month,
Okay, yeah.
maybe a
Yeah.
couple weeks.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah. 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 Some people find it helpful to use, then this slide talks about it, rewriting their notes, because sometimes they say the act of writing can really help solidify information for people. Making flashcards to help with memorization, because then you're testing yourself and really getting your brain like in that mindset of having to pull information from memory and practicing recall. Yeah. 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 You really you have to build on it, if that makes sense. Like what I used to like to do as a student would be, if I had to study for a test, say I might set aside maybe 4 days before the test to start studying. And one day I might focus on, say I was studying for a history test, say, the first day of studying, I might focus on everything that happened, say up to, I don't know, the Civil War, say. I might, from a certain time period to the Civil War, I might study that on the first day. And then the second day, I might spend a few minutes reviewing what I studied the first day, but then focus the bulk of the time the second day on maybe Civil War to, I don't know, another time period leading up, whatever the exam would be. And then the next day I would focus on reviewing the previous 2 days and then build on that. So you're constantly recalling the information and you're seeing it over and over again. It's not just the one night. You can also like paraphrase and repeat the study information in your own words. And that can be good too, because then you can try to teach it to someone else and see if you can actually explain the concepts. Especially if you're teaching it to someone that knows nothing about the material. If they can get what you're talking about, that's usually a good sign. If it's vocabulary, studying definitions, if it's essay questions, you can always practice structuring and answering the essay questions ahead of time, and even giving yourself a set time to do it and see how much information you can get down about a certain topic. Of course, definitely pay attention to points in your notes or reading or whatnot that the professor might have. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you answer, sorry guys, I just started. How do you answer an essay question per se?
Well, yeah, and a lot of the time you're going to hope that your faculty will give you a good structure and what they're expecting. But if you don't understand, or if they don't give a clear guideline of what they're looking for in an essay question, you can always ask, because sometimes if the test is literally one essay question, they're probably looking for an introduction paragraph, multiple body paragraphs, and a conclusion. In the high school setting, I don't know if they call this anymore, but the hamburger model, your
Okay,
intro,
yeah,
you're intro. Yeah, I mean, they might be looking for that. If it's short answers, they might not want something that long, but really it's kind of their responsibility to let you know what they're expecting. But if you don't know, just ask.
A while, guys. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. No, and you're probably not alone in thinking that. But yeah, the thing with the essay questions, you're probably going to prepare by creating essays ahead of time to see how much you know. It's very different than testing yourself for say key terms. You're probably going to use flashcards or some kind of online app like Quizlet, or I'll get into all that at the end, different things to help you study. But yeah, I mean, you're going to prepare differently.
I heard Chegg is good too.
Yeah, there's all different sites. I have a slide where I go over some of them, but there's a million. If you were to type into Google or whatever, browser or whatnot, whatever search engine you use, study websites, there's so many things that'll come up for testing yourself. So I'll go over a few of them, but you have to find what works for you.
Okay.
And then always you could study with friends or the help of a tutor. Tutoring is really good because anybody at BCC can get the help of a tutor through the Learning Commons for free. And you think about it, you're already paying into your tuition and fees, all the services on campus, so you might as well use them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Studying with friends is good too, or classmates. Because sometimes, what you are strong in, maybe your friends or the classmates aren't, and maybe they're strong in areas that maybe you're not. You can help teach each other, but the key with that is you want to make sure you stay on task and don't get sidetracked. So yeah, pros and cons to that, I guess. Did anybody want to Yeah. Anybody want to add anything? Okay, let's keep going. And then textbooks. Everybody loves reading their textbooks. It's such fun, like it's such a fun activity. Even people that like reading love textbooks. But I mean, the thing with textbooks is usually they're very dense and boring. Unless you're really interested in the material, then that's good. But there's like this certain approach called SQ3R. It's like a specific approach to reading the type of texts that are found in textbooks. It's pretty simple. So SQ3R stands for survey, questions, and then 3 R's, read, recite, and review. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I highlight it here. So S stands for survey, which basically means, so you have to read a chapter for your class. You wouldn't just dive into reading it like right from the beginning. You would use this approach to first survey the chapter. So you might go through the chapter quickly and read all the headings, maybe the chapter summary and any term definitions, just to kind of get acclimated to what material you're going to be reading. And then from there, you would create questions for yourself to answer while you're reading the chapter. And you can use the things that you read through when you surveyed to help yourself create the questions. So basically things you want to find out while you're reading to kind of guide you through. And then you would actually read the chapter slowly, identifying answers to what questions that you came up with. One thing you want to do is fall into the habit of highlighting everything you read, because that's a pretty passive strategy. What you want to do is really be selective on what you highlight, if highlighting is a strategy you use, and a lot of students do choose to highlight. You really want to focus on main ideas after you finish a paragraph or a section. So don't highlight as you go. Read first and then go back and highlight the most important things. And then also you can consider reading out loud, because sometimes people find that dual modality really helpful if they're like reading with their eyes, but then also listening to themselves read. It kind of has like 2 ways of going about it. And then after reading, you'd recite, which is basically you go through and answer the questions you had for yourself. You write your answers without looking at the book. So you're trying to like recall what things you learned while you were reading without looking. And then you review. So then you read through again and check your answers to see how much you actually got. If you were off on anything, you might focus on reading those sections again. So it's a pretty straightforward approach once you think about it, but it's just a more focused way of reading textbooks, because you definitely read a textbook much differently than you read a book for fun. Material is just a lot, usually denser, and yeah, usually it's different types of language. So has anybody done something like this, or like have something similar that they do?
I feel like I'll say it's kind of the opposite of what this is, but I think this was a great thing to talk about, because I was always somebody who would just highlight as they go. And I would be like, oh, this is so important. This is so important. And I would get to the bottom of the page and like 95% of the things were highlighted. And then I'd have to go back in with like a pen and actually underline what's important. So I like reading it through first and then kind of identifying. Because I would just go through and think everything was important until I got to the end.
And probably everything is important. That's why it's included in the book. But you probably want to just focus on the things that the main things to take away. So, for history, it might be important people or figures or time frames or, events that led up to something happening. I'm using history as an example because I like history. But yeah, I mean, when you're highlighting as you go, it's just natural to want to say, yeah, I need to know this. I need to know this. But you actually pick up more than you realize when you're reading anyway, and then go focus on the details afterwards. All right, let's move on then. So I talked a little bit before about why testing yourself is so important. I touched on it a little bit, but that's a really key thing I want you to take away. Because as I said before, just reading isn't studying. You really have to employ a strategy that gets your brain in the testing mindset. Because then once you go to actually take the test, you've already kind of like trained your brain to respond to that kind of scenario, which when we get a test, usually I like fight or flight response kind of kicks in. And for some of us, we can kind of like rise to the occasion and just perform. But some of us can't do that. And we kind of get that like flight response, like, oh, you blank out, and it's kind of like our coping mechanism for dealing with a stressful experience. But if you've worked on testing yourself already and you've got your brain trained, it helps to kind of like alleviate that from happening. So I'm just going to show this short video that kind of emphasizes this point and kind of gets it across on why that's so important. I'm hoping the audio will play, but if not, I might have to, I don't know when I screen shared, I might not have clicked off that box to allow audio. So let me just click this. If you hear something, tell me. If not, I'll just have to enable that box. Can you hear anything? Okay, I just have to, bear with me for 1 second, guys, sorry. Let me just go out and I will screen share again. Optimize and share sound. Okay. Let me try again and just tell me if you can hear.
Stress and memory has supported.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
Now we do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let me start from the beginning and play this little video. All right.
Over a decade of research on stress and memory has supported one seemingly obvious conclusion. When people are stressed, they have a harder time remembering things. However, this may not always be the case. In a new study published in the journal Science, researchers at Tufts University have found that the right learning strategy, specifically retrieval practice, also known as taking practice tests, can protect memory against the negative effects of stress.
Typically, when people are under high levels of stress, they are not able to access information. So information that was previously learned cannot be retrieved. However, in the context of our present experiment, we found that those subjects who learned that information while engaging in retrieval practice were able to retrieve it even under those high levels of stress.
To look at the relationship between learning strategies and stress, a team led by psychologist Ayanna Thomas and graduate student Amy Smith gave 120 student participants a couple of things to study.
We have participants come in and learn the stimuli. So in this case, we had words and images. We had them learn either via study practice, they just study and restudy and restudy and restudy, or a separate group of participants engaged in retrieval practice, where they were asked to recall from memory all of the stimuli they could 3 times over. They come back on day 2, half of the study practice people and half of the retrieval practice participants get stressed and half don't. Stress induction involves having participants give an extemporaneous speech and then solve difficult math problems.
7,468.
That's incorrect. Subtract 19 from 4,781.
4,767.
That's incorrect.
During and after the stress-inducing scenario, participants took memory tests. The researchers found that stressed individuals who studied using retrieval practice remembered just as many items as their non-stressed counterparts. Participants who just studied the material over and over, however, remembered fewer items overall, particularly after stress.
I see the application of this kind of finding broadly. I see it applying to students who experience test anxiety. Getting them to learn information very well through retrieval practice may mediate that test anxiety. I also see this applicable to any individual who has to retrieve complex information under high stakes.
When you time match people who study information over and over and over and people who study and then test over and over, it's the people who test who come out on top. So it's not a matter of how much or how long you study, it's a matter of how you study.
Sorry, everyone, I lost the PowerPoint there, but hopefully that little video, I like that little video. I think it hones in on the point that I'm trying to make, is that active studying is better than just reading or, doing the same thing over and over again. So let me bring up the PowerPoint again. And we'll go from there. We actually don't have too much left, so you guys have been a great group, but I definitely want to spend enough time on like question and answer or conversation too. So let's see, here's my PowerPoint again. Let me get back to the slide we were on. And we were right. Oops. All right, we were right here. Okay. So I know we have a mixed group of students here, like some students actively in classes now, some students who are getting ready to take classes in the summer and fall. But I know we're at a point in the semester that is stressful for people because we do have exams coming up next week. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about preparing for exams, particularly remote exams, because so many classes are still online at this point. And sometimes preparing for a remote exam is not as intuitive or obvious as it is when you're preparing for a traditional paper and pencil test in the class. So specifically when you're preparing for like a remote exam or an exam that's online, you really want to take the same amount of time and care preparing as if you were going to an in-person class. So predetermine where you're going to take your exam. If you're taking it at home, do you have a certain space that you can use that is less distracting? If you're living with other people, can you kind of prepare them to know that you need to focus on, the exam for a certain amount of time? Maybe put a note on the door if you have like a room you can go in. Do all of that preparation ahead of time, which will make the actual test taking experience easier when it actually happens. Decide when you will take your exam, if it's going to be available for several days or a chunk of time. Some professors will put an exam up on Blackboard, say, and they'll say it's available starting Sunday and it needs to be completed by Friday of the same week. So, get a sense of the time frame you have and set aside when you're going to do it. It's always a good idea not to wait till the last minute because things come up and it's always going to be, the 11th hour before you have to take the exam that you'll have technical problems or something, crazy will happen. So, give yourself enough time that it's not all riding on, a couple hours before it's due. Take some time to organize any materials you're allowed to use while taking the exam. A lot of the time, if you're having an exam online, most professors, I think, will allow students to use, books or notes or things like that, but organize that stuff ahead of time, because if you can use it during your test, if you already have that things, in an organized fashion, it'll make it easier to go through them as you're taking your exam. That way you're not spending all the time you have allotted going through materials to find answers. Like if you already have a good system set up, it'll just make it more effective to use the time. And of course, make note of the amount of time you have to complete the exam. If it's timed, if they have a timer. Sometimes students find that having the timer in the corner that often comes up on Blackboard, if it's a timed exam, they can find that anxiety provoking. And what I tell students, this is going to sound really low tech and basic, but you can always put a Post-it note over it in the corner. And then every once in a while, just look under the Post-it note to see how much time you have left, because you don't want to be shocked if the exam closes out and you didn't realize that you only had 10 minutes left, say. But then you won't have it staring you in the face and just creating anxiety because you're only focused on the timer. So that's just something I like to say. It's very basic, but a lot of people find that it works. And then while taking your exam, and this can be for online exams or in-person exams, read the directions slowly and carefully, preview the entire exam ahead of time if possible. Sometimes if it's an online exam, you have to go through it one question at a time and you can't see the whole exam like you can if you were just sitting down in class and taking it by paper. But if you can preview it, that's a good strategy because you can, go through the exam, answer the questions that are really easy for you first, and then save more of the time to answer the difficult questions that you might need more time to think about, or you might need to reread multiple times. Don't rush through multiple choice questions either. Even if you read a multiple choice question and say there's 4 options, even if the first option seems right, read all of the options before you answer, because sometimes, responses can be worded in a tricky way. And once you read all 4, you might find one that actually is more, more correct or actually makes more sense for the question. So even if you think you found the answer, read them all just in case. Also, you can underline like important terms or phrases within the questions. So something like describe or compare and contrast, list and explain, those types of things. That way you're actually answering the question that's being asked, especially in like open response or short answer type questions. If the professor's asking you to compare and contrast two things, that's a lot different than just to describe why something happened. So you want to make sure you're actually answering the question that's being asked. Check all your answers before moving on to the next question, especially if it's an online test and you can't go back. Read your answer or read the question to make sure that you're really confident on what you're answering before you move on, or submitting the exam, of course. Make sure you've answered all parts of the question if it's multi-part. That can really trip students up, especially if it's like a longer type essay question and you have to answer multiple things. Make sure you've answered every part. That way you can maximize how many points you get. You can always create a brief outline before writing essays. That way you can kind of structure your responses. I would keep that pretty brief. Keep it a brief, keep it like to a brief outline, because you don't want to spend all your time outlining and then no time for actually writing and answering. But it can give you some structure, so that way you're not just figuring out what you're saying as you're going. And then, of course, what's the rule of thumb? All educators will say, answer all questions, do not leave anything blank, because some professors will award partial credit, or if they can at least get a sense of where you were going with something, they might award you some points, even if it's not all. And all those points add up. So definitely do not leave anything blank. And then managing test anxiety, aside from just preparing and testing yourself and training your brain to respond to the testing scenario, it's obvious probably, but get adequate sleep before the exam. If you have to choose between cramming and sleep, because your brain cannot function on, only a little bit of sleep, no matter what you think. Sleep is so important to the testing experience. Manage your self-talk. So don't doubt yourself. Don't go into the catastrophe thinking of, I'm not going to be able to, do this. I didn't study the right things. Just manage how you're talking to yourself. And don't think about your potential score or the outcome of the exam. Just focus on answering the questions one by one. And obviously, accept the fact that you might not get everything right in your exam, and that's okay. Most of the time, that's not expected. You might have to accept that some questions might be more challenging and you might get some wrong, but the key is to answer as much as you can right. And then, of course, you can always consider campus resources. We have counseling services at Bristol, and I know they do a lot of work of preparing students for dealing with test anxiety and different kind of, more counseling related things to managing that experience. So those are some of the things. I'm not a counselor or anybody that works in, that field, but those are the things that, I've talked to students about that sometimes they find helpful. Does anybody want to spend any time talking about study strategies that have worked for them that maybe I didn't cover, or they want to let, the rest of the group know? We kind of talked about that a little bit when Chelsea was talking about, their experience of studying for the Marine exam, you said, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I will say too, I feel like Allison gave a lot of great points. And sometimes it's trying a few of them too to figure out what works best for you. Like for me, I'm a flashcard fanatic, but I physically need to write out my flashcards. I've tried the online and
Okay.
my brain just doesn't do it that way. Like I need to physically write it down. So it's okay to try some of these things, and just because it's not working for you, don't let that give you test anxiety either. I feel like everybody just has to find like what's going to work best for them in that setting.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, everybody is unique. Like I said before, we're not robots. So, you might find that studying at night works for you, and using physical flashcards is what's going to make, you be able to manage, the time that you have, make it the most effective. You have to figure it out. There's some trial and error to it. Some online tools that you might be aware of, maybe not. Quizlet, StudyStack, quizzes, all those are different ways of doing like online flashcards or online study guides, or ways of quizzing yourself online. Then there's things like Spark Notes and Khan Academy, which are not necessarily like flashcard related things, but it's ways of further learning material like outside of the classroom. Khan Academy has a lot of lessons, and Spark Notes has a lot of written material to review. Marinara timer I wanted to include because I thought that was kind of funny. We talked before about the Pomodoro technique of using chunking study time into manageable sections, and Pomodoro comes from the word tomato in Italian. So marinara timer is kind of a funny take on that. So the marinara timer website is a way of it's basically a timer. It's kind of like a timer app. They use marinara because of tomatoes, but it's a way of setting a timer on your computer to do that focused 25-minute study session. Then it alerts you for when it's time to take your break. So I thought that was kind of funny, so I wanted to include that. But there's so many tools online to consider. And I know after this session, Melissa's going to share this PowerPoint with you all. So if you want to, these are all clickable links. So you can always click on any of these things to be taken to the websites and learn more. So feel free to do that. So that's really like the end of my formal presentation. Like any good, academic, I included my resources, which you can also look at when you get your, when you get the PowerPoint. But we have plenty of time. I know we have about, let me see, like 10 minutes or so we can talk. I'll stay on if anybody wants to talk one-on-one. Or if you want to talk specifically after the recording is over, feel free. But thank you so much. You've all been a really great group, and I'm glad you took some time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Allison. I feel like this might have been the second or third time we've done this, and every time I feel like I remember something new to let students know. So thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, good.
And like Allison said, I know sometimes
clapping icon.
I know sometimes it's not comfortable to ask questions on the recording, so I am going to stop it now so that you can feel free to ask something if you didn't want to be on here. But thank you so much again, everybody.